The city of Vera burned for 3 straight nights. Towering silver buildings collapsed one after another, crashing into streets flooded with sparks and molten glass. Emergency sirens screamed through the smoke-choked air, while thousands of civilians ran toward the evacuation ports. Above them, warships tore through the clouds like predators hunting wounded prey. And in the center of the chaos stood Subject 7. She did not run. She did not scream. She simply watched. Flames reflected in her pale metallic eyes as soldiers fired pulse rounds around her. The heat was enough to melt steel beams nearby, yet she stood motionless beneath the falling ash, her dark combat cloak fluttering in the hot wind. People called her many things across the galaxy. The Ash Daughter, the Machine Saint, the last weapon of Earth. But before all of that, she had once been called Lyra. 20 years ago, humanity had lost the stellar war against the Keeler Dominion. Desperate for survival, human scientists created enhanced children, emotionless beings designed only for combat. Lyra was the strongest of them all. She could survive temperatures that killed ordinary soldiers. She could calculate battlefield trajectories faster than military AIs. And after years of war, she stopped feeling anything at all. The Keeler feared her. Humans feared her more. A collapsing transport ship exploded nearby, shaking the ground beneath her boots. Civilians cried as they pushed toward the final escape shuttle. Lyra watched them with empty eyes. No sadness, no fear, no anger, just silence. A wounded Keeler soldier crawled through the debris near her feet, blood leaking from the cracks in his armor. He looked up at her with terror. "You destroyed this city," he whispered. Lyra tilted her head slightly. "Yes. Thousands are dead. Yes." The alien coughed weakly. "How can you stand there without crying?" For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she turned away, because she truly did not know how. Hours later, the city was gone. Only ruins remained beneath black smoke and falling ash. Human Command ordered Lyra to retreat before orbital bombardment began, but instead she wandered through the wreckage alone. Something inside her felt unsettled. Not pain, not guilt, just noise. A sensation she could not explain. That was when she found the workshop. Half buried beneath collapsed concrete stood a tiny maintenance building somehow untouched by the firestorm. Dim yellow light flickered behind cracked windows. Lyra approached cautiously. Inside, an old human man sat repairing a broken service drone. He looked up lazily as she entered. "Oh," he muttered. "You're the weapon girl everyone talks about." Lyra stared at him silently. The man returned to tightening a bolt. "Relax. I'm too old to be afraid anymore." "You should evacuate," Lyra said flatly. "And go where? The fleet will bomb this district soon." "Probably." The old man shrugged. "Still got work to finish." Lyra studied him carefully. Most people panicked near her. This man barely seemed interested. "What are you building?" she asked. The old mechanic smiled faintly. "A bed." Lyra frowned. "For who?" The man pointed toward a tiny alien child sleeping in the corner beneath a torn blanket. Small, thin, blue-skinned, probably orphaned during the attack. "She hasn't slept properly in days," he said quietly. "Figured every kid deserves a real bed before the world ends." Lyra looked at the child, then at the tiny unfinished wooden frame beside the mechanic. Something strange tightened inside her chest, a feeling unfamiliar and sharp. The old man noticed her expression. "You ever sleep in a real bed?" he asked gently. Lyra answered immediately. "No, not once in her entire life. Training chambers, medical pods, military transports, cold metal floors, but never a bed." The mechanic nodded slowly, almost sadly. "That explains those eyes." Outside, the city continued burning. But for the first time since her creation, Lyra could not stop staring at something small, fragile, and warm. The tiny bed. The orbital bombardment began at dawn. Red streaks of plasma ripped through the clouds above Vera, followed by explosions powerful enough to shake the entire district. Dust drifted from the workshop ceiling as distant buildings vanished into pillars of fire. Yet inside the tiny repair shop, The old mechanic continued sanding a piece of wood like the galaxy was not ending around him. Lyra stood near the doorway, watching silently. "You should leave now," she said again. The old man chuckled softly. "You soldiers only know two things: fighting and running. The fleet will erase this sector. Then I'll die in my chair." He glanced at the sleeping child. "But not before finishing this." Lyra looked toward the little alien girl curled beneath the blanket. Her species was unfamiliar. Small horns, pale blue skin, tiny trembling hands even in sleep. "She is Keeler," Lyra observed. "Yep. They killed humans by the millions." "Also true. Then why help her?" The mechanic placed his tools down carefully. "Because she's a child." Lyra said nothing. To her, species had always been irrelevant. Human, alien, enemy, ally. All targets eventually looked the same through battlefield scanners. But this man spoke as though innocence still mattered. Outside, another explosion thundered across the city. The child suddenly jolted awake with a frightened gasp. For a split second, terror flooded her wide silver eyes. She scrambled backward against the wall, shaking violently when she noticed Lyra standing nearby. The girl recognized her immediately. Everyone did. "The Ash daughter," she whispered fearfully. Lyra remained still. The mechanic sighed. "Easy now. She's not gonna hurt you." The child clearly did not believe that. Lyra turned away from them both and stared out the cracked window toward the burning skyline. Fear. She understood fear well. Entire planets feared her. That fear had once made humanity victorious. So why did it suddenly feel unpleasant? Behind her, the mechanic picked up the small wooden frame. "Hand me that toolbox, would ya?" Lyra glanced at him coldly. "Why would I help you?" "Because you've been standing there for 2 hours pretending you don't care." Before she could answer, another violent shockwave slammed through the district. Part of the workshop roof cracked loudly. The child whimpered. Without thinking, Lyra moved instantly. She crossed the room in a blur and caught the falling debris with one arm before it crushed the corner where the girl sat. Concrete dust scattered across her shoulders. The child stared at her in stunned silence. Lyra slowly lowered the broken beam aside. The mechanic smiled faintly. "Ha!" he muttered. "Guess there's still a person inside all that metal after all." Lyra ignored him, but something inside her chest felt unstable again. That strange pressure. That warmth. She hated it. Hours passed. The mechanic worked while the child nervously watched from the corner. To Lyra's own confusion, she remained there too. Finally, the old man wiped sweat from his forehead. Done. The tiny bed was simple. Crooked wooden legs, thin mattress stuffing, uneven paint, but it looked soft. The mechanic carefully placed a faded blue blanket across it and smiled proudly. "There we are." The little alien girl stepped closer slowly, like she could barely believe it existed. "For me," she whispered. "Course it's for you." The child touched the blanket gently. Then, unexpectedly, she began crying. Not loud sobs, just quiet tears sliding down her cheeks. Lyra watched in confusion. "She's crying over this?" The mechanic looked toward her. "Not because of the bed." "Then why?" "Because nobody's been kind to her in a very long time." Those words struck harder than artillery fire. Lyra suddenly remembered fragments she had buried years ago. Cold laboratories. Doctors speaking about her like machinery. Training officers rewarding efficiency instead of emotion. No kindness. Not once. She stared at the tiny bed again. A simple object built from scraps during the end of a city, yet somehow more powerful than every weapon in orbit. The child carefully climbed onto the mattress and curled beneath the blanket with trembling happiness. And for reasons Lyra could not understand, her vision blurred. She touched her cheek instinctively. Wet. A tear. Her first tear. The mechanic noticed immediately but said nothing. Outside, Vera burned beneath falling fire from the heavens. But inside the workshop, the galaxy's deadliest soldier quietly cried beside a tiny wooden bed. Lyra wiped the tear away immediately, almost violently. She stared at the moisture on her fingertips as though it were blood. "What is this?" she whispered. The old mechanic leaned back in his chair with tired eyes. "It's called crying. I know the biological process." Her voice sharpened. "I do not understand why it happened." The mechanic smiled sadly. "That's because nobody ever taught you feelings. Only survival." Outside, another wave of bombardment lit the sky orange. The workshop windows rattled violently, but Lyra barely noticed now. Her mind was elsewhere. She remembered battlefield statistics, enemy casualties, planetary destruction charts. Every death she had caused was stored perfectly inside her enhanced memory. Yet none of it had ever made her cry. Not the screams, not the burning cities, not even the children. So why this? Why a tiny bed made from broken wood and scraps? The alien child shifted beneath the blanket, finally sleeping peacefully despite the war outside. Her tiny hands clutched the edge of the pillow like someone afraid it might disappear. Lyra kept staring. The mechanic noticed. "You know why that bed matters?" he asked quietly. "No. Because for one night, that little girl gets to feel safe." Safe. The word sounded unfamiliar. Lyra had protected humanity for years, but she herself had never experienced safety. Weapons were not meant to feel safe. Weapons were meant to be used. A sudden transmission crackled through Lyra's earpiece. "Subject 7. Respond immediately." Her expression hardened again. "This is Subject 7. Static hissed before Commander Vale's cold voice emerged. "You ignored retreat orders. I remained operational. Orbital cleansing will begin in 20 minutes. Leave the sector now." Lyra glanced around the workshop. The child, the mechanic, the tiny bed. "Negative," she replied. Silence followed. Then, "Repeat that." "I will remain here temporarily." Commander Vale's voice darkened. "You are military property. That is not a request. Property. Not soldier. Not human. Property." Lyra slowly clenched her fists. The mechanic quietly pretended not to listen while tightening another bolt on his drone. "You were built for war," Vale continued. "Do not forget your purpose." The transmission ended. For several seconds, the room was silent except for distant explosions. Then the mechanic spoke softly. "You gonna obey them?" Lyra answered automatically. "Yes." But the word felt wrong. The old man stood carefully and walked toward a dusty shelf near the back wall. After searching through old containers, he pulled out a tiny object wrapped in cloth. "What's that?" Lyra asked. "Something stupid." He handed it to her. Inside the cloth was a tiny carved wooden figure, roughly shaped, poorly painted, but recognizable. A small human girl holding a flower. "I made that for my daughter," the mechanic said quietly. Lyra looked up. She died during the first invasion. For the first time since meeting him, the old man's hands trembled slightly. "I couldn't save her," he exhaled shakily. "Spent years angry at the whole galaxy after that. Yet you help alien children. Because hatred didn't bring my little girl back." Lyra stared at the carving. Small, fragile, meaningless in war. Yet the mechanic held it like treasure. "You know," he continued softly, "I think humanity survives because we build things instead of only destroying them." Those words buried themselves deep inside her mind. Because Lyra had only ever destroyed. Cities, ships, lives. Never built, never protected, never comforted. For the first time in years, she suddenly hated what she was. A violent explosion erupted nearby. The workshop lights flickered out instantly. Warning sirens echoed outside. Lyra's combat sensors activated automatically. Incoming hostile signatures. Multiple. Healer scavenger troops entering the district. The mechanic cursed under his breath. The child woke in terror again. Lyra slowly rose to her feet. The cold battlefield expression returned to her face like an old mask. "How many?" the mechanic asked nervously. She closed her eyes briefly, scanning. 12 armed soldiers. The old man swallowed hard. "Can you stop them?" Lyra looked toward the frightened child clutching her blanket on the tiny bed. Then toward the workshop door. Her eyes became still and deadly once more. Yes, but this time, she was not fighting for orders. She was fighting for something small, warm, and fragile inside that burning room. Something she had never protected before. Home. The first Keeler soldier crashed through the workshop window. Glass exploded inward as the armored alien rolled across the floor with a plasma rifle raised. Two more entered behind him, weapons scanning the darkness. "Search the building," one barked. They never saw Lyra move. One moment she stood beside the doorway. The next, the first soldier slammed into the wall hard enough to crack concrete. His rifle shattered before he could scream. The second soldier fired instantly. Blue plasma bolts tore through the workshop. But Lyra caught the attacker's arm, twisted sharply, and redirected the blast straight into the third soldier behind him. The room filled with smoke and sparks. The child screamed. The mechanic quickly shielded her behind the tiny bed. More footsteps echoed outside. Too many. Lyra's combat systems calculated the situation immediately. 12 hostiles. Close quarters engagement. High probability of structural collapse. Low probability of civilian survival. Normally, that calculation would not matter. But tonight it did. "Stay down," she ordered coldly. Then she stepped outside into the burning street. The district looked like hell itself. Buildings burned like giant torches beneath a black sky streaked with orbital fire. Keeler scavenger troops moved through the rubble searching for survivors and supplies. Then they saw her. For a brief moment, nobody moved. Even enemy soldiers recognized the pale-eyed woman standing alone in the flames. "The Ash daughter," one whispered fearfully. Lyra slowly raised her head. "You entered the wrong building." The soldiers opened fire together. Plasma bolts screamed through the air. But Lyra became a blur. She crossed the street faster than human eyes could track, slamming one soldier through a transport vehicle before tearing another rifle apart with her bare hands. A third attacker lunged with an energy blade. Lyra caught the weapon mid-strike. The heat melted flesh from her palm. She did not react. Instead, she drove the soldier face-first into burning debris. Screams echoed across the ruined street. The remaining Keeler panicked instantly, because this was no ordinary human. This was the creature their empire used in bedtime warnings. The monster that destroyed fleets. And tonight, she was angry. Inside the workshop, the mechanic listened to the sounds of battle outside. Crashing metal. Explosions. Screams. The little alien girl trembled beneath her blanket. "She'll die," the child whispered tearfully. The old man shook his head slowly. "No," he said quietly. "Not tonight." The girl looked confused. "Why?" The mechanic stared toward the doorway. "Because for the first time in her life, she finally has something worth protecting." Outside, 3 soldiers attempted retreat. Lyra landed in front of them instantly. One raised trembling hands. "Please." She stopped. The word hit her strangely. Please. Fear. Mercy. For years, enemies had begged her for mercy. She had never listened. But now, she remembered the tiny bed, the child sleeping peacefully, the mechanic building kindness while the world ended outside. Something inside her had changed. Slowly, Lyra stepped aside. "Leave this district," she said coldly. The soldiers stared in disbelief. "You're letting us go?" "If you return," she answered quietly. "I won't." They fled immediately into the burning streets. Lyra watched them disappear. And for the first time in her existence, she had chosen not to kill. A sudden voice crackled through the sky. "Attention remaining civilians." Human dropships descended through smoke above the district. Searchlights swept across ruined buildings as military loudspeakers echoed through the city. "This sector will be cleansed in 10 minutes. All surviving personnel evacuate immediately." Lyra's expression darkened. 10 minutes. Not enough. The workshop would not survive orbital fire. She turned back toward the building and froze. The mechanic stood in the doorway holding the child gently in his arms. Behind them sat the tiny wooden bed, still untouched by the chaos, still standing. The old man smiled faintly at her. You protected us. Lyra stared at him silently. I protected the objective, she answered automatically. The mechanic laughed softly. No, he said. You protected people. Those words hit harder than any weapon. Because deep inside, Lyra realized something terrifying. He was right, and she did not know who she was becoming anymore. The evacuation ships would arrive in 7 minutes. Lyra scanned the sky as dropships descended through smoke and fire, their engines roaring above the ruined city. Searchlights swept across collapsing buildings while distant explosions shook the streets. The mechanic adjusted the frightened child in his arms. You should go, he told Lyra quietly. She looked at him. You are civilians. Extraction priority remains active. The old man smiled faintly. That's military talk for... I'm worried about you. I do not experience worry. Sure you don't. Lyra ignored him, but something about the conversation felt strangely warm. Then her combat sensors flashed red. New threat detected. Heavy armored signatures approaching fast. Not scavengers this time. Killer execution units. Lyra's eyes narrowed instantly. They found us. The mechanic's expression darkened. How many? 4. The old man relaxed slightly. Only 4. They are Reapers. That smile vanished immediately. Everyone in the galaxy feared killer Reapers. Massive cybernetic soldiers designed specifically to hunt enhanced humans. Stronger than tanks. Faster than drones. Nearly impossible to kill. Even ordinary armies avoided them. But Lyra did not move. Instead, she slowly stepped forward into the burning street once more. The mechanic called after her. Lyra. She stopped. That was the first time anyone had used her real name in years. Not Subject 7. Not Weapon. Not Ash Daughter. Lyra. The old man looked directly into her eyes. Come back alive. Something inside her chest tightened painfully. She nodded once, then disappeared into the smoke. The first Reaper emerged from the flames like a machine from a nightmare. Over 3 meters tall. Black armored plating. Glowing red optics. Its heavy footsteps cracked the pavement beneath it. Then it saw her. Subject 7 identified. The machine growled mechanically. Termination authorized. 3 more appeared behind it. Lyra stood alone against all 4. Years ago, she would have charged immediately without thought or fear. But now something was different, because losing tonight actually mattered. The first Reaper fired a shoulder cannon. Lyra dodged instantly as plasma exploded behind her, vaporizing half a building. She launched herself forward and slammed into the machine hard enough to bend its armor inward. The Reaper grabbed her throat immediately. Human weapon instability detected. It snarled. Emotional corruption confirmed. Lyra froze for half a second. Corruption. That was what Human Command called emotions in enhanced soldiers. Weakness. Failure. The machine tightened its grip. You are defective now. Lyra stared into its glowing red eyes, then quietly replied, Maybe. She tore its arm off. The battle shook the entire district. One Reaper crashed through burning vehicles while another pinned Lyra through a concrete wall. Plasma fire lit the streets like artificial lightning. Yet, despite the destruction around her, Lyra's thoughts kept returning to the workshop, to the child sleeping safely, to the old mechanic smiling proudly beside the tiny bed. She realized something terrifying during the fight. She did not want them to die. Not because of duty, not because of orders, because she cared. The realization hit harder than any weapon. A Reaper slammed her into the pavement, cracking the street beneath her. Why protect them? The machine demanded. Lyra struggled beneath its crushing weight. Then she remembered the mechanic's words. Every child deserves a real bed before the world ends. For the first time in her life, Lyra understood kindness. And once understood, she could no longer ignore it. With a scream of raw fury, she overloaded her combat core. Blue energy erupted from her body in a violent shockwave. The Reapers were thrown backward through burning wreckage as nearby windows shattered instantly. Warning signals exploded across her vision. Core instability critical. System failure imminent. But the enemy machines were finally destroyed. The street became silent except for distant fire. Lyra dropped to one knee, blood running down her arm. For the first time in years, she was exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, and somehow that hurt more. A dropship descended nearby moments later. Human soldiers rushed out with weapons raised, then froze when they saw her standing among the destroyed Reapers. One whispered shakily, "How did she kill all four alone?" Another stared nervously at Lyra like she might attack at any moment. Commander Vale emerged last. Cold, expressionless, just like her, or who she used to be. "You disobeyed direct orders," he said flatly. Lyra said nothing. Vale glanced toward the workshop behind her, then toward the dead machines scattered across the street. "You endangered military assets for civilians." Still silence. Then the commander's eyes narrowed slightly. "You've changed." Lyra slowly looked back at the tiny workshop door glowing softly in the firelight. "Yes," she answered quietly. And for the first time in her existence, she was not ashamed of it. The dropship engines roared against the burning sky. Human soldiers secured the landing zone while medics rushed between the ruins collecting survivors. Above the city, orbital cannons continued firing into distant sectors of Vera, turning entire districts into oceans of flame. Commander Vale stood motionless before Lyra. "You will board the ship immediately," he ordered. Lyra glanced toward the workshop. The mechanic and the little alien girl had just stepped outside. The child clung tightly to the old man's coat while staring nervously at the armed soldiers around them. Vale noticed them too. His expression hardened. "Alien civilians are not authorized for extraction." The mechanic frowned. "You can't be serious. Transport capacity is limited." The child lowered her head silently. Lyra felt anger rise instantly, a sharp, unfamiliar heat in her chest. "She comes with us," Lyra said. Vale looked directly at her. "That is not your decision. She is a child. She is Keeler." The words hung coldly in the air. Several nearby soldiers avoided eye contact. Nobody wanted to argue with either of them. The mechanic stepped forward carefully. "Listen, Commander." No, Vale's voice became sharper. "Humanity survived because we stopped showing mercy." Lyra stared at him silently. Those words sounded familiar, because she herself had once believed them. Mercy was weakness. Emotion was corruption. Kindness got people killed. That had been the philosophy used to create her. But now, standing beside the tiny frightened child and the old man who built beds during the apocalypse, the philosophy suddenly felt empty. The little alien girl carefully stepped behind Lyra. The motion was small, instinctive, trusting, and it shattered something deep inside her. No one had ever hidden behind Lyra for safety before. People only hid from her. Commander Vale noticed too. His eyes narrowed. "She fears us less than she fears you," he observed quietly. Lyra looked down at the child clutching the edge of her torn cloak. The girl trembled slightly but did not let go. "I will not leave her here," Lyra said firmly. Vale's voice turned dangerously calm. "That sounds like insubordination." "It is." The nearby soldiers stiffened immediately. Nobody spoke to Commander Vale that way, especially not Subject 7. The commander stepped closer. "You were engineered to protect humanity," Lyra answered without hesitation. "And humanity taught me kindness tonight." For the first time, Vale looked genuinely unsettled, as though he no longer recognized the weapon standing before him. Suddenly, warning sirens screamed across the district. A soldier shouted into comms. "Commander! Massive energy spike detected underground." The street shook violently. Cracks split the pavement beneath their feet. Lyra's combat sensors activated instantly. Then her face went pale. "No!" Far below the city, something enormous was waking up. The mechanic frowned nervously. "What is it?" Lyra answered quietly. "A Titan." Even the soldiers reacted fearfully to the word. During the final years of the Stellar War, the Keeler created Titans, gigantic biomechanical war creatures capable of destroying entire cities alone. Most were believed destroyed years ago. Apparently, one had been buried beneath Vera all this time. The ground exploded upward. A monstrous metallic limb burst through the street, followed by a deafening roar powerful enough to shake nearby buildings apart. Then the Titan emerged, hundreds of meters tall, black armor glowing with molten cracks, massive crimson eyes scanning the ruined city. The evacuation soldiers panicked instantly. Fall back! Get the civilians aboard now! Dropships lifted hurriedly into the air as the Titan unleashed a beam of burning plasma across the skyline, vaporizing entire structures in seconds. Chaos swallowed the district. Commander Vale turned toward Lyra immediately. Subject 7, he ordered coldly. Hold the Titan here while we evacuate. Lyra understood what that meant. A sacrifice mission. No enhanced human had ever survived fighting a Titan alone. The mechanic realized it too. No, he said sharply. You're sending her to die. Vale did not answer. Because he was. The little alien girl suddenly grabbed Lyra's hand tightly. Her tiny voice trembled. Please don't go. The words struck harder than artillery fire. Lyra looked down at her, then toward the tiny wooden bed still visible through the workshop doorway. A simple thing. Fragile. Soft. But somehow stronger than war itself. For the first time in her life, Lyra wanted a future. Not battle. Not orders. Not survival. A future. And that terrified her more than the Titan rising above the city. Commander Vale stepped closer one last time. This is your purpose. Lyra slowly turned toward the burning skyline, toward the gigantic monster waiting in the fire. Then she quietly answered, no. And for the first time ever, Subject 7 disobeyed humanity itself. The entire district fell silent after Lyra's answer. Even the soldiers stared at her in shock. Commander Vale's face hardened immediately. You are refusing a direct command? Yes. The word echoed beneath the burning sky like a gunshot. For years, Subject 7 had obeyed every order without hesitation. She destroyed colonies, fleets, and entire armies because humanity demanded it. But tonight was different. Tonight, she finally understood what it meant to protect instead of destroy. And she would not let them take that away. Behind her, the little alien girl still held tightly to her hand. Tiny fingers, shaking with fear, trusting her completely. Lyra realized she would rather die than betray that trust. The Titan roared again. Its massive body moved through the ruins like a walking apocalypse, each footstep shaking the city. Burning debris rained from nearby buildings as evacuation ships desperately fled into the sky. Commander Vale activated his sidearm. Subject 7, he warned coldly. You belong to humanity. Lyra slowly looked back at him. No, she said quietly. For the first time in her life, she belonged to herself. The commander raised the weapon. Nearby soldiers froze nervously. Nobody wanted to witness what happened next. But before Vale could speak again, the mechanic stepped between them. That's enough. The old man stood trembling but fearless in front of Lyra. She saved more human lives than everyone here combined, he snapped. And now you want to throw her away because she learned how to care? Vale's expression remained cold. She is unstable. The mechanic laughed bitterly. No, she's human. Those words hit Lyra harder than any battlefield wound. Human. Not weapon. Not monster. Human. She had spent her entire existence believing she was something broken and artificial. Yet somehow, an old mechanic and a frightened child saw more humanity in her than the people who created her ever did. Suddenly, emergency alarms screamed across every military channel. Titan energy surge detected. Lyra turned instantly. The Titan's chest began glowing brighter and brighter, molten energy building inside its core. Her combat systems calculated the blast radius immediately. If it fired now, everything within 20 kilometers would disappear. The evacuation ships, the civilians, the workshop, the tiny bed, everyone. Commander Vale realized it too. We're out of time. Soldiers scrambled toward the dropships in panic. The mechanic grabbed the child protectively. Lyra stared at the Titan silently. Then she understood. There was only one way to stop it: her overloaded combat core. If she pushed it beyond critical limits, the resulting energy burst might destroy the Titan before it fired. But the explosion would kill her too. She knew that instantly. Oddly enough, she was not afraid, because for the first time in her life, her death would actually mean something. Not orders. Not war. A choice. The little alien girl noticed the expression in Lyra's eyes. Children always understood more than adults believed. "You're leaving," she whispered fearfully. Lyra knelt slowly in front of her. The child's eyes filled with tears immediately. For several seconds, Lyra did not know what to say. Words had never been her strength. So instead, she carefully removed the small wooden carving from her pocket, the one the mechanic had shown her earlier. The tiny girl holding a flower. Lyra placed it gently into the child's hands. "Keep this safe," she said softly. The child began crying harder. "Please don't go." Lyra looked toward the tiny wooden bed inside the workshop one last time. Such a simple thing. But because of it, she had discovered kindness, mercy, love, all the things war tried to erase. The mechanic stepped beside her quietly. "You don't have to do this alone," he whispered. Lyra smiled faintly. It was small, uncertain, probably her first real smile. "But I'm not alone anymore," she answered. Then she stood. Blue energy slowly began glowing beneath her skin as her combat core overloaded beyond safety limits. Warning signals screamed across her vision. Core collapse imminent. Lyra ignored them. She looked back once more at the frightened child and the old mechanic standing beside the tiny bed, the first home she had ever known. Then she turned toward the burning city, toward the Titan waiting in the flames. And the girl once feared as humanity's greatest weapon walked forward not as a monster, but as someone finally worth remembering. The Titan fired first. A massive beam of molten energy tore across the skyline, turning towers into ash instantly. The night itself seemed to split apart beneath the blast. Lyra ran directly toward it. Blue energy burned violently beneath her skin now, glowing through cracks forming across her armor like flesh. Every step pushed her combat core closer to collapse. Warning signals flooded her vision. Heart failure imminent. Core detonation in 312. But she did not stop. Behind her, evacuation ships climbed desperately into the sky. The mechanic watched from the workshop doorway, holding the crying child tightly in his arms. "Come back," the little girl whispered. But deep down, all of them already knew. Lyra was saying goodbye. The Titan lowered its enormous head toward her. "Defective human unit," it thundered mechanically. "You have abandoned your purpose." Lyra kept walking through the flames. For most of her life, that accusation would have destroyed her. Purpose, duty, obedience. Those were the chains wrapped around her soul since birth. But tonight she finally understood something the galaxy never had. A weapon's purpose could change. "You're wrong," she said quietly. The Titan unleashed another plasma barrage. Lyra exploded upward through the fire like a comet. She crashed directly through the creature's armored chest, ripping molten metal apart with bare hands while blue energy erupted around her in violent waves. The Titan roared so loudly nearby windows shattered across the district. Massive mechanical limbs slammed into her, throwing her through burning buildings. Bones broke instantly. She rose anyway, because for the first time in her existence, she had something worth surviving for. The Titan prepared its core cannon again. Energy gathered inside the monster's chest brighter than a second sun. Lyra looked upward through smoke and fire. Then she closed her eyes briefly, and remembered small things. A warm blanket, an old mechanic smiling gently, tiny hands holding onto her sleeve, and a little wooden bed built in the middle of the apocalypse. Not war, not destruction, not death. That was what finally made her feel human. Tears slowly filled her eyes again. But this time she understood why. Lyra opened her eyes, then released everything. Her overloaded combat core erupted into brilliant blue light that swallowed the entire district. Shock waves shattered the city as the Titan screamed beneath the explosion. For one impossible moment, the night became silent. Then the Titan disintegrated, piece by piece, ash drifting through burning skies. The explosion wave swept harmlessly upward into the clouds instead of outward toward the civilians below. Lyra had redirected it intentionally. Even at the very end, she protected them. When the light faded, the city became still. The Titan was gone. The fires slowly died around the ruined streets. And at the center of the crater, Lyra lay motionless. Commander Vale approached carefully with several soldiers behind him. Nobody spoke, because the woman lying there no longer looked like humanity's greatest weapon. She just looked tired. The mechanic slowly walked forward, carrying the little alien girl in his arms. The child broke free immediately and ran toward Lyra. "No, no, please." She fell beside her, crying openly now. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, Lyra's fingers moved slightly, barely. The mechanic froze. Lyra, her eyes opened weakly, damaged, fading, but alive. The child hugged her instantly, sobbing into her chest. And for the first time in her entire life, someone embraced her without fear. Lyra slowly wrapped one trembling arm around the little girl. Then she looked toward the mechanic. "You were right," she whispered weakly. The old man smiled through tears. "About what?" Lyra's eyes drifted toward the workshop ruins nearby, toward the tiny wooden bed somehow still standing beneath falling ash. That small things matter. Weeks later, survivors would tell stories about the Battle of Vera. Some called Lyra a hero. Others called her humanity's greatest soldier. But the child remembered her differently. Not as a weapon. Not as a monster. Just as the lonely girl who cried over a tiny bed because nobody had ever built something gentle for her before. And long after the war ended, inside a quiet little home rebuilt from the ashes of the city, that tiny wooden bed remained untouched. A reminder that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can save even the most broken soul.